Good morning and welcome to the Forum at St. Bart's. My name is Peter Thompson. I'm the Associate Rector for Formation and Liturgy here. And I'm so glad that you can join us for this conversation about responding to COVID-19 across the Anglican Communion with Rob Radke, the President and CEO of Episcopal Relief and Development. And now to introduce Rob is Bishop Dean Wolfe, the Rector of St. Bart's.
Well, good morning. We're delighted to have Rob with us, a longtime parishioner with his wife Mary and daughter Eva. Prior to working at ERD, Rob served in a variety of capacities at the Asia Society. At Episcopal Relief and Development, Rob provides strategic leadership to the agency's programs in nearly 40 countries across Africa, Latin America, and Asia, as well as in the United States. He's overseen a number of major initiatives, including Nets for Life, the agency's award-winning flagship malaria prevention program, which to date has reached 47 million people in 17 African countries, and the U.S. Disaster Preparedness and Response Program, which helps Episcopal dioceses, congregations, and other church institutions prepare for and respond to disasters in their local communities. Rob holds a bachelor's degree from Columbia University and a doctorate from Oxford, where he was a Rhodes Scholar. He also holds an honorary doctoral degree from Episcopal Divinity School. As I said, he's married to Mary Abraham, and they have a daughter, Eva, who attended Kenyon, one of the great Episcopal schools in Ohio, and now she's working on a PhD in sociology at another great Ohio institution, the Ohio State University. Rob, we're so glad you're here, and welcome.
Thank you, Dean, and thank you, Peter, for giving me this opportunity. St. Bart's is a deep and important part of our life, and it grieves us as a family that we cannot be able to worship in person, as I'm sure it does for many of the people who are watching this presentation. But I want to commend you and the rest of the team at St. Bart's for really providing a wonderful online experience. We have been attending church probably more regularly online than we did when we were there in person, and it's been wonderful. So thank you to the entire team at St. Bart's for all of the hard work, and I know it's hard work that goes into making it a rich and meaningful experience. And we look forward to the day when we can all be together and share in the Eucharist and worship together again. Thank you also for giving me the opportunity to talk today about how Episcopal Relief and Development is responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. I have a brief PowerPoint that we'll share that will kind of give you a high-level view of the work. And then what's always most interesting for me is to know what's on people's minds and to answer questions. I always find it helpful to provide a little bit of context about the Anglican Communion. Here in the United States, in the Episcopal Church, we have how shall I put this diplomatically, an ambivalent relationship sometimes to the Anglican Communion. The Anglican Communion, though, is a worldwide communion. There are between 80 and 85 million members. It's the third largest communion after the Roman Catholics and the Orthodox churches. It's present in 165 countries. So it's really, truly a global church. And Episcopal Relief and Development initiates and operates all of its programs, virtually all of its programs, through the Anglican Communion. It's a huge network that reaches, as I like to say, way beyond the end of the road. And through engaging with the Anglican Communion, we as Episcopalians here in the United States are able to bring hope and health to people everywhere. Peter, if you want to just go to the next slide, please. This is a map. It's of July 13th, and it shows you the hot spots for the COVID-19. And I've been watching, as I'm sure many of us have, over the last 6 months, as this map has gone from light peach to dark red, and then in some lucky places back to a lighter color. But overall, the progression of the COVID pandemic, as you can see, has been pretty dramatic. It's my view that a lot of the incidence of confirmed cases is probably understated in most places in the world, but particularly understated in Africa. It's not a continent that is, or many of the countries in Africa are not known for having robust health systems and health surveillance systems. And so I think that this map probably understates the impact in Africa. But you can see overall that the trend for the pandemic has not been good over the last 5 months, and we've seen that in our own country. I remember vividly the day that we decided that we needed to pull back our staff from around the world. We had Episcopal Relief and Development staff around the world. We called them all back to New York because we were afraid many of them would get trapped overseas and be unable to return. And since that day, we have been engaging daily throughout the United States and throughout the Anglican Communion on what this pandemic has meant for us and for our brothers and sisters in Christ around the world. We, on a normal programmatic year, would serve nearly 3 million people through the Anglican Communion. And we expect that number to go up dramatically as a result of the pandemic. Peter, if you want to go to the next slide. For people who are interested in learning more about what Episcopal Relief and Development is doing on its pandemic response, we have a section of our website that is full of lots of rich information. I encourage people to go there and to look at it. We have built this out with a focus on faith and faith-based responses to epidemics and pandemics. Here in the United States, we have initiated weekly webinars for Episcopal Church people, diocesan and parish leaders on how to access benefits, issues of how domestic violence is impacted by COVID, mental health issues, food security. All of these are available on our website to listen to. As we know, this pandemic has been a rolling pandemic. So things that were relevant in New York in March and April are now relevant in places like Texas and Arizona. So I really encourage you, if you're watching from any of those places, to take a look at what's available on the website. In addition, we organized weekly calls for all bishops and canons to help them focus on what were going to be the key things that they needed to do as church leaders to shepherd their diocese through what is now clearly going to be a very, very difficult time. In addition, our staff has done individual meetings with almost any diocese that wants it on how to shape their own ministries to respond to the COVID in their local context. If you go to the next slide, Peter, you can see here a list of the places where Episcopal Relief and Development has been responding in the United States. And this is just the beginning. We expect this response to go on, sadly, for many, many months. We customize all of our programs to what is relevant and necessary in the local context, focusing on who are the most vulnerable people in these communities and how can the church support them. We don't have a one-size-fits-all sort of solution because those don't work. We really look to local church leaders to identify where they think they can get the greatest leverage, where they think they can make the greatest impact. So you'll see here in this list a variety of things from mental health counseling, food distribution, a whole range of different kinds of activities that are necessary. I do want to draw people's attention to the work on the Rosebud Reservation. Native Americans in this country have been very, very heavily impacted, as have all people of color, of course. But Native Americans have really borne a terrible burden with this COVID pandemic. And so that's something that the Episcopal Church in general and Episcopal Relief and Development is very, very intensely focused on. The next slide shows you how Episcopal Relief and Development is conceptualizing its international response. We've identified 4 common themes: food security through cash inputs and direct cash transfers. When we all were called into lockdown here in the United States, it was not impossible. It wasn't difficult, but it wasn't impossible for us to store 14 days of food. In most places in the world, though, that's just not possible. There's very little refrigeration. Most people are smallholder farmers. They need to go to the market on a regular basis, both to sell and to buy. And when they lost that ability, food security became a huge issue. Clean water is an issue in most of the parts of the world where the Anglican Communion is present. So we have upped our work on water, sanitation, hygiene, and protective equipment. The safeguarding of vulnerable populations. Violence against women and children increases usually during times of disasters, and COVID is no exception to that. So we are focused on equipping the church to help intervene in those and provide support in those situations where violence has increased against women and children. And then the other thing, and we certainly experienced this in our own country, simply getting timely and accurate information on prevention and management of COVID-19 is a major issue in many, many parts of the world. And so positioning the church as a trusted source for what's happening in COVID, in the spread of COVID, and how to prevent it has been another, equipping the church to do that has been another major priority for Episcopal Relief and Development. We wrap all of these four common themes into pastoral care. And then with Episcopal Relief and Development, it's very important that we be able to document. So digital data collection on how many people are being impacted, what is that impact, what's being changed, what are the greatest changes that we're noticing, what do we need to be doing differently? It's really about monitoring, evaluation, and most importantly, learning about what we're doing so that we're constantly improving on the work that we do. The next slide shows you a couple of pictures from our program partners from around the world. Peter, if you just flip to the next slide. We have done over 40 emergency responses so far throughout the Anglican Communion. There are some wonderful examples from the Philippines. You can see here microfinance. Go back one more, sorry. Not the map yet. From the Philippines, if you go back, Peter, you can. Thanks. Philippines, they're making protective equipment. This is a microfinance initiative that Episcopal Relief and Development has been supporting. In Brazil, distributing food and water to vulnerable people. In Burundi, gathering the Mothers Union for hand washing demonstrations. This is really, in many ways, basic stuff, but it's stuff that people would not otherwise have access to unless the church were there to provide it. We work closely with the Anglican Alliance, which is the alliance of international relief and development agencies and churches throughout the Anglican Communion to coordinate all of this work, to ensure that we're not double funding some things and ignoring other things, to be sure that there's full transparency on the delivery of all of these services. Now, if you go to the next slide, Peter, it shows you the pins in the map around the world of where Episcopal Relief and Development is responding internationally. Yeah, there you are. And this is growing. Every week we add 2 or 3 more places where we're working. You can see the predominance of activity in the Caribbean and Latin America, and then also throughout Africa. COVID also informs all of the ongoing work that we had. When COVID happened, we didn't stop doing programs that are meant to increase child health and mortality, our integrated early childhood development. We did not stop our work on reducing gender-based violence. We did not stop our climate resilience work. And so we're having to take a step back and look at all of that work and reimagine it as a result of COVID. A lot of the work that we do depends on social proximity. And one of the major ways that you fight COVID is social distancing, as we know. So how do we do microfinance groups when we have to be socially distanced? How do we hang and distribute malaria nets when you can't enter people's homes anymore? How are we going to reimagine all of these programs in a way that makes them safe and effective going forward? Because if it's not COVID, it's going to be something else. And I think we've realized as an organization that we have to build in pandemic resilience, if you will, into the very design of the programs. And so that's the other aspect of this. In addition to responding to the immediate consequences of COVID, we're working very hard as well to respond and to plan going forward how we're going to continue to deliver the rest of our work. If you go to the next slide, Peter, it shows work that we're doing on teaching social distancing. The Mothers Union is one of the great treasures of the Anglican Communion. It's not well known here in the United States, but it's a global organization of exactly what it sounds like, women, most of whom are mothers, although not exclusively. They are often the opinion leaders around health and safety in their communities. And so we partner with the Mothers Union here in Southern Africa, particularly in Malawi, on reducing VAWC, which is violence against women and children. And you can see here, people are trying very hard to be socially distanced as we run these workshops. The next slide shows how we're working on our program, Moments That Matter, which is our branded integrated early childhood development program, providing tip sheets for all of our health volunteers on how to do proper hand washing, proper sanitation in the communities. This will be an ongoing aspect of our work long after we've extinguished COVID, I think, as I said before. And then finally, I'd like to end the presentation with this wonderful quotation that comes from one of our partners in Houston, Texas. And I think it really summarizes, and I'm just going to read it aloud, it really summarizes the ethos of the work of Episcopal Relief and Development in the church. Molly Carr, she writes, "We are built for this, and we are building for this. Our strengths, our technology, our deep relationships with the communities who partner with us, and our reputation in the community as people who can do it when no one else can." And I think that's really the charism of faith-based development in general, and specifically for the work that we're able to do by the grace of God with and through the Anglican Communion. So that's the formal presentation. I'd be happy to talk further and answer questions.
Well, Rob, let me start it out by just asking, how is responding to this pandemic similar or different from how you responded to other public health crises in the past?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. This isn't our first rodeo, but it's by far the largest rodeo we've ever been in. It's truly global. It's had an impact on all of us as individuals, as an organization ourselves. Often we're responding to something that's taking place somewhere else. But this, disrupted our work life. We, closed our office in, 36 hours. We distributed our staff back to their homes. Many people left New York City for obvious reasons. So, we've been doing all of this while we've been managing it ourselves. It's also obviously had an impact on our donors, all of whom have been impacted in one way or another. And of course, our program partners. The other thing that's different about this is that it's ongoing. So many other disasters are an event. The hurricane comes, it strikes, it then, thank goodness, goes away, and then you're dealing with the aftermath. But this is, as we've all seen, an ongoing crisis. We learned some things from prior pandemics. Flu season is always an issue, and we've had a long practice of helping churches and communities respond to the flu season. And in the developing world, the Ebola crisis helped us exercise some muscles and learn some muscle memory on how to help churches respond. Contact tracing, these sorts of things that were really essential for the fighting of Ebola. The other thing that the Ebola crisis taught us on a much smaller scale was how important the local faith leader credibility was. Because one of the ways that Ebola was transmitted was through funeral practices. And a lot of those funeral practices were driven by faith practices. So what we did is we re-engineered working with church leaders, of course, the faith practices, which resulted in a much lower transmission of Ebola. So we learned some things from that. But this really taught us and reinforced for me that this is what we do best: mobilizing faith communities to address human needs. As I said, faith communities have high levels of trust, and they have networks that are second to none. They can reach people in places that almost no governments, certainly many other major NGOs, are unable to reach. So, there's a mixture of things that we've learned from past experiences, but as a matter of scale, this crisis is beyond anything. And I think it's also going to last much longer than anything that we've ever experienced before.
Where have the signs of hope been for you in this? This has been a kind of an unfolding disaster, and the timeline keeps extending, and people talk about feeling just kind of depressed and overwhelmed. Where are the opportunities for hope, do you think, in this?
Well, here's where I turn to my faith. As Christians, despair is just not an option. We can feel depressed, we can feel sad, but at the end of the day, despair is not an option. We are an Easter people. That is what we are called to be. I take heart from the words of the prophet Zechariah. Return to your stronghold, O prisoners of hope. Today I declare that I will restore to you double. And then I don't know whether you've heard of this wonderful the late South African theologian Steve DeGruchy, who said that as Christians, we are called to be midwives of hope. So I find hope by being hopeful. I mean, it sounds sort of tautological, I suppose, but it really does make a difference. And in addition, the reality is that the science is progressing. I try to stay pretty on top of the science, both in terms of pandemic management, but more importantly, in terms of vaccine development. The scientific community, notwithstanding what we might read in the newspaper and all the rivalries and whatnot, the scientific community at its heart is very, very unified around the world in trying to identify solutions to this. And we as humans have a pretty good track record on developing vaccines. The medical community developed a vaccine for Ebola very quickly when it proved necessary. Human immune systems are also designed for survival. We've evolved and our immune system is resilient. That doesn't mean that COVID isn't a serious issue. It absolutely is. But, at the sort of the 60,000 foot level, I think humans have proven themselves to be resilient survivors. And, the progress is real. As of last week, there were 216 vaccines in development around the world. That's a huge number. A huge amount has been invested. They've shortened the development of vaccine. Normally would take 10 years. They've telescoped it down to, in some cases, 18 months. Just remarkable things. And the probability is that of those 216 vaccines, that a reasonable percentage, 5%, 10%, could be effective in different ways. This isn't going to be, we wake up one morning and read on the front page of the New York Times that this is solved. We're going to find that there are going to be several generations of vaccines that have different levels of effectiveness, and we'll get more perfect as we go along. But I think that we'll see vaccine, if not by the end of this year, an emergency vaccine, if not by the end of this year, certainly deployed for healthcare workers by early next year. I'm quite hopeful about that. So the science, both faith and science give me hope. The other thing is that, again, notwithstanding what you read in the newspaper about what's happening in our own country, I think we in New York experienced a remarkable period of social solidarity. There was a deep understanding that we, despite all of our differences, and New York is a loud, noisy, confrontational city, had to come together and do this, and we beat it. It's not gone completely, but I'll never forget the day. We live up on Mount Sinai Hospital. In March, we heard sirens. I don't know, it felt like 15 an hour. And there was a field hospital put up in Central Park. The day I walked into Central Park and saw the field hospital coming down, that was a joyous day. And I know the rest of the country is now where we were in March, and they may not feel that way, but I think that if we can come together with social solidarity, that'll make a huge difference. And that also gives me hope, because we've done it before, we can do it again.
Thanks, Rob. Peter, do we have questions coming in from anyone?
No, not quite yet. I do encourage those of you who are watching and have questions for Rob to send them in via the live chat function on YouTube, via the comments on Facebook, or you can also email them to me at pthompson@stbarts.org. That's PTHOMPSON@STBARTS.org. Rob, I'm wondering if you can reflect a little bit on the difference between working internationally and domestically, both on COVID-19 and other issues. I'm struck that you're an organization that does so much work domestically as well as internationally, and I imagine there are different factors that come into play in that work.
Yeah, absolutely. In general, I would say that in the United States, there's great inequality, of course, here in this country, but by and large, compared to many of the places we work internationally, there is much more of a public health and medical infrastructure that people can turn to. We don't have equal access to it. There are all sorts of serious problems with our country and access to medical care. But compare that to Zambia, or I don't want to call out any particular country, and many other countries in the developing world, there just simply is no medical or public health robust system. So, in the United States, our program is meant to fill in gaps that exist in the system. So when we respond here in the United States, we look to local parishes to identify the most vulnerable people in their communities who are falling through the cracks, who are not getting access to what is in fact available to people. Many benefits that the government makes available to people here in the United States just simply go unclaimed because most people have no idea that they're eligible for them. So, if the church here in the United States and church leaders can empower people in their communities and the most vulnerable people in their communities and assist them to get access to what's available, we can do a whole lot. So it's a highly leveraged environment here in the United States for us to work in. There's a lot here, a lot of tools that we can work on. Internationally, it's very different. Many of the places where we work, I tell this story that, I'll get on an airplane and I'll fly 18 hours to wherever, and I'll then drive in a Land Rover for another 3 days, it seems, and then I'll get out and I'll walk another 6 miles to the local community that we might be visiting. And many times in that local community, the only piece of infrastructure that has any connection to the outside world is a house of worship, whether that's a mosque or a church. There's no clinic, there are no police officers, there's no government presence. The nearest community medical clinic could be 2 days walk away. So, what our insight was that what we needed to do was to not bring clinics to this community. That was not going to be sustainable. But what we could do is strengthen the presence of the faith community, many of whom want to do community ministry just like we do at St. Bart's. All people of faith have that in their DNA in some way or another. So just as we do community ministry at St. Bart's at Park and 50th, that church beyond the end of the road in rural Africa or Latin America or Asia or wherever is committed to helping its community, and the members of that church are committed to helping that community. Many times those members of the church are also themselves going to be the beneficiaries of that work, which is fine. But it's important that the church it's important to Episcopal Relief and Development, that is, that the church make its services and resources available to anyone in need in those communities. So there's just much less government and official infrastructure to work with in the international context. But that doesn't mean that there aren't resources and assets that are available. Certainly the church is one of the major, and the church, its presence, its infrastructure, and its credibility are one of the major assets that we can leverage in that context.
So we've received several questions actually that relate to that question. One is about so-called vaccine colonialism. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about, developed countries kind of using vaccines as leverage kind of tools of power in less developed countries.
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's certainly a huge amount of conversation going on in the global public health space around that issue. It's very important that, in our view, certainly, that the vaccine be treated as a public good, that it not be something that is hoarded by wealthy countries and then used as leverage to get poorer countries to do the things that we want them to do, which is sometimes how international aid works. That's been identified early on as an issue, and I know a lot of us are very concerned about that at an advocacy level. It's absolutely an issue, and I'm hopeful that the conversation is advanced enough in this process that won't be an issue as much as it's been in the past.
We've received some questions as well about the collaborations you all have with other organizations, specifically with federal and state governments, as well as with other denominations. Are we working across the church with Lutherans, et cetera? Catholic? Sure.
Yes. The short answer to that is yes. The programs here in the United States are, of course, all carried out at the local level. So the local parishes, like St. Bart's, collaborates with in almost all cases. And this is an expectation that Episcopal Relief and Development sets, by the way. When we give a grant, one of the questions we always ask is, who are you collaborating with in your community to ensure that this is not repeating, not doubling down on something that's already happening, but is also available to people beyond just the local resources are going to reach, so that it's leveraged. There's something called VOAD, which is the Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster, which usually convenes a faith group, and we ask local parishes and dioceses to become part of their local VOAD here in the United States as they deliver emergency response, which is also true for COVID. For COVID. Internationally, there's a huge amount of collaboration that occurs not only interdenominationally, but also amongst NGOs. So, again, when we're looking at a program in somewhere in Africa, one of the sort of gating questions is, who are you planning to collaborate with in order to ensure good outcomes for this? And it depends, again, in the local context. Often there's a local faith coordination committee. There's the Council of Christian Churches in most countries that is focused on this, and the Anglican Church almost always has a seat at that table. The collaboration and coordination takes place in many, many different ways. At Episcopal Relief and Development's level, we're very involved in an organization called Interaction, which is essentially the organization of all international relief and development agencies here in the United States, sharing information, sharing best practices. What are you hearing? What are you seeing? What are you learning? What are the best ways of addressing this problem or that problem? So, it's occurring at multiple levels simultaneously.
Another question relates to the skepticism some folks have about following health guidelines. This has been pretty publicized in the US. I wonder if it occurs in other countries, but given that you've worked on a lot of different health issues, what kind of advice would you give for dealing with those who are skeptical about adhering to guidelines and advice from medical professionals?
Yeah, the general advice is look at the evidence. The advice you're getting from health and medical professionals is usually evidence-based. Most people, when they have good information, make rational choices. A parallel example of this would be what we learned from our malaria net program. A lot of people who received malaria nets had no idea what the malaria net's use was. They didn't understand what the cause of the transmission, how their children even contracted malaria. They didn't understand that it was mosquitoes that carried it from person to person. So there's a basic level of education that you've got to do to be sure that you have an informed citizenry. And so we call on the church in the developing world, certainly, and here in the United States as necessary, to be very, very clear about the facts, to not get themselves involved in political discussions around, in our case, face mask wearing. I mean, it's just proven that this universal face mask wearing reduces, the transmission of this disease. And if you want evidence of that, look to Hong Kong. You know how many people have died in Hong Kong from COVID? 4. 4 people in Hong Kong, densely populated, but universal face mask wearing, it's not the only reason, but it is absolutely a contributing factor to the ending of the spreading of that disease. So, I encourage people who have skepticism to, look to trusted resources. We try to be one of the channels of trusted resources to people both here in the United States, but also overseas on this. And you just have to look to the facts.
One person wonders how your work will change when a vaccine becomes available. How will you be involved in distributing the vaccine, in prioritizing certain areas over others, that kind of thing?
Yeah, vaccine distribution will probably be carried out by governments, even in the developing world, because we as church organizations are not well equipped to do medical procedures that involve blood, and the administration of, assuming it's administered by a needle, often involves blood. What we will be involved in is educating people about the vaccine. There's a huge skepticism about vaccines, both here in the United States and overseas, for good reason. And so we will be focused on ensuring that people understand the value of the vaccine, helping them understand where they can get the vaccine. Some vaccines may require boosters, ensuring that people are well informed about the process. And again, this is something that is absolutely essential. You can build all vaccine distribution centers in the world, but if people don't have trust in it or don't know about it, it doesn't matter. And that's something that Episcopal Relief and Development, our faith partners, are going to be well equipped to do.
Are you at all concerned that in the rush to a vaccine, we might start using a vaccine that's not quite safe or effective enough?
One has to be concerned always about that. I have high level of confidence that everybody is in good faith, trying their very hardest to be sure that it's safe. You know, there are 100% guarantees? Of course not. But I don't think that we would do mass deployment of a vaccine that we knew to be unsafe. You know, vaccine will likely be used initially with healthcare workers, people who are in direct contact with COVID patients. They're a very well-defined population, so the impact of the vaccine will be able to track that, and the observance of the impact of that vaccine will be very evident early on if we have a problem with any one of the vaccines that comes forward.
Yeah. Hearkening back to the earlier question about collaboration, one person wonders about the work of evangelicals in this space. Does ERD collaborate with evangelical organizations?
Well, evangelical is a very big term, and there are many different flavors of evangelical. So let me just state what our overall broad policy is, that if we can agree on common outcomes, that we will collaborate. But if we feel that you know, the outcomes are being in some way influenced by political motives or other motives, you will be very wary about that. And some evangelical groups fall into those categories, and some don't. Some do very, very good work. So I wouldn't want to make a categorical statement about working with evangelical organizations, or any organization for that matter.
And I'm wondering too about ERD's place in the Anglican Communion. You're an organization affiliated with the Episcopal Church, but you're of course in this larger Anglican Communion ecosphere. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the communion relations. Sure.
It's interesting. When I first started at Episcopal Relief and Development, which is just a little bit over 15 years ago, it was in the aftermath of the consecration of Gene Robinson, the Windsor Report. There was a huge, movement to, punish us for our what were perceived to be heretical stances on various things. And so I would travel around the world. And I make it a point whenever I show up in someone's diocese to call on the local bishop or the local archbishop. And, I would often be treated to a robust dressing down for the sins or the perceived sins of the Episcopal Church. And I would sit there and I would listen, and I would say, thank you very much, Your Grace, for sharing your concerns with me. I'm a lay person. These theological disputes are way above my pay grade. I'm here to talk about clean water or malaria prevention. And you could just feel the tension leave the room. Once it was clear that Episcopal Relief and Development was not there to advance or force, as a condition of our engagement, somebody to change their opinion about anything, and that if we could, and this sort of speaks to the evangelical question, if we could come to a common understanding of what our joint objectives were and our outcomes were, then we could work together. That stopped happening. I have to say, there's been a generational shift amongst bishops throughout the Anglican Communion, and I almost never encounter any, so certainly no overt hostility. Every once in a while, we'll get a bishop that's clearly getting squeezed some way, by ACNA or something like that, and they feel they have to say something, and so they say it, and I'm like, yeah, okay, you have to say it, fine. Do you still want to do the program? Oh yeah, we still want to do the program. So we're not a litmus test organization, and so we don't ask people to be a litmus test themselves for us. So we move pretty easily. There are some places where we're still not welcome, and we don't push it. If we're not welcome, we're not welcome. There's plenty of other places where we can do our work. There's no shortage of opportunities for us to do the kind of work that we want to work with. I'm like many families, there are lots of things that go on in the Anglican Communion, and I kind of see it. It's more background noise for us. I pay attention to it, but it doesn't interfere in the work.
So what can we do as a community here at St. Bart's? What can individuals who are watching this morning, what can they do to help ERD in your work?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I want to just commend St. Bart's for what it already is doing. I mean, the work that you do through your community ministry is your first responders. And so, I think St. Bart's should, first of all, commend itself, if you will, for the important work that it's doing in its local community. That's absolutely important and vital. And I know that there's a partnership with Episcopal Charities of the Diocese of New York. I think that's wonderful and exciting. And I commend that work to you. And I commend it to my fellow parishioners at St. Bart's. My wife and I doubled down on our support for community ministry. I think that's really important. I think, and this goes to the sort of the vaccine colonialism question that was raised earlier, I think there's going to be a huge need. There are already huge social justice challenges that have emerged, but that's going to be ongoing. And I encourage people to engage with the Episcopal Public Policy Network, EPPN. That's the advocacy arm of the Episcopal Church. So as individuals, I really commend that organization and that network to you. I wouldn't be earning my paycheck if I didn't say donations to Episcopal Relief and Development are really important. We're very concerned about the long-term financial resources that we're going to have. One of the major revenue streams that we have is church offerings. So if a major hurricane hits sometime in the next 6 weeks, our normal method would be to send out a bulletin insert to every church in the country and ask the priest or the priest in charge or the rector to get up and ask for donations on our behalf. Well, we're not meeting in person as a church almost anywhere. And so I am very concerned. I'm not so much concerned responding to the COVID crisis, but I am concerned about more crises as they begin to unfold, and they will. So support for Episcopal Relief and Development is really, really important. And then they're just at a personal level. This may sound very simplistic, but it's really the most important thing to keep in mind as individuals. And this gets back to my social solidarity issue. We all have a responsibility to do the 3 W's: wash our hands, wear a mask, and watch our distance. If we can do those 3 things, it won't solve the whole problem by any stretch of the imagination, but it is something that each one of us as an individual can do. That and give to community ministry and Episcopal Relief and Development.
So we have just a little more time left. I wonder if you could talk about the long-term view on relief and development issues. We're focusing a lot on COVID-19 right now, but of course, there's a climate change still continues to be a huge issue affecting and that kind of thing like that. What do you see once we get past COVID-19? What are the important issues to focus on when it comes to global relief and development?
So in general, I would say COVID-19 has been an accelerator of trends that are already evident. Were already evident before COVID. Things that we thought were going to happen in 5 to 10 years are happening now. That includes, the impact of, climate change. Not that climate change is accelerating, although it certainly is. It's not accelerating as a result of COVID, but the impact of it and the social justice implications of it are really clear, or much more clear than they were to many of us before. So I see climate resilience and climate adaptation becoming an increasingly bigger priority for organizations in the relief and development space like Episcopal Relief and Development. violence against women and children. The lockdowns have forced many people to take shelter with their abusers. So it's also put a lot of pressure on families and on relationships. And so we're seeing in the developing world an uptick in that. So we're going to have to up our game to be much more proactive on that. The early childhood development. Children in our country are missing, probably most children are going to miss a year of their school. And that's going to be particularly dangerous for the youngest children, the children in the nursery and pre-K years. They're missing interventions that they'll never get back. And that's something that we as a country, and this isn't really international, but we as a country are going to have to face. But it's also equally true internationally. That children are going to have hunger is skyrocketing. The projections on food insecurity over the next 5 years are really terrifying. We had made a lot of progress. If we'd have had this conversation 6 months ago, I would have talked about how much has changed for the good. Not that there wasn't more that needed to change and more that needed to happen. There's a wonderful book called Factfulness that I commend to people, but it talks about how important it is to acknowledge the progress that had been made. A lot of that progress is being rolled back as a result of COVID. So we're going to have a lot of ground to make up. The SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, achieving those by 2030 is going to look like it was never going to be an easy lift, but it's going to look like a very, very heavy lift. So, we're prisoners of hope, and we as Christians need to be midwives of hope. So I don't want to end on a note of negativity or despair, because we do know the answers to these problems. That isn't the issue. What we need to do is just address them, and to keep addressing them, and double down on many of the things that we were doing before COVID, and the needs are just going to be that much greater.
Rob, thank you so much for being with us. I wonder if Dean has a final question or comment.
Well, every time I hear you speak, Rob, I just take such great pride as an Episcopalian in the work of Episcopal Relief and Development. I think you guys are doing such great work, and I'm just, it's just exciting, and it sort of demands our support. And I really appreciate what you're doing, and not only in this crisis, but in the next crisis and the crisis after that. Episcopal Relief and Development is positioned to respond. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And I also want to thank my community, our community at St. Bart's. I feel very held up in prayer by you, by everyone. My Christianity has been formed to a large extent in the pews of St. Bart's, listening to the wonderful preaching over many decades, and in the fellowship that I've had with many friends and parishioners at St. Bart's. So thank everyone, thank all of you, and thank you to everybody at St. Bart's for their support, their love, and their care. All
right. Well, God bless.
Thank you so much, Rob. Thank you all for watching.
Bye. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Thank you.